So this is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Lisa Ellis, your nutrition therapist and author. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me here.
Want to let people know we are on live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and we'll also be on Newsly. That's we're a featured podcast on that platform. For those of you who haven't checked out that platform, you can use that coupon code of Ghost streaming on the bottom. You use Ghost, you can check that out for free for 30 days. We'll be on Newsly later tonight. We also have your URL with whydidijustEatThat.com. That will be fully clickable on all the platforms that we're on. And so you'll be able to click through on that whydidijustEatThat.com. And a couple of questions we always ask anybody before we get into the heart of the interview is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Uh, what motivates me? I really like to help other people. It feeds my soul. I did my training in an eating disorder center and kind of fell in love with that population. And so I've just been working with them ever since.
That's interesting. It's good to be, do what you feel you have a passion for. When we ended up on the podcast, we talked to a lot of people who are entrepreneurs or people who find their passion. They find what they really are motivated by, and it just seems to be fulfilling if you do what you love. So you found your kind of sweet spot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's always good because a lot of times people find in life that they're not fulfilled with their 9 to 5. They're not fulfilled with what maybe they even were trained as a doctor, but they don't even like being a doctor. And then they finally find the thing that they're really passionate about. Was that something that you immediately discovered or you grew into?
I definitely grew into. So I had been a dietitian for a number of years, putting people on what we call diets, right? Restrictive diets. Don't eat this, eat this. Don't eat that, eat this. And what we realized throughout the years is dieting really doesn't work. Restrictive dieting, like less than 5% of all people who go on a quote unquote diet actually keep the weight off. So what I like to say to people is if I tell you that airplane you're planning to get on has less than a 5% chance of getting where you hope you want to go, are you going to get on it? Probably not. And yet people go on and off diets all the time. Fad diets, all different types of diets. And so, diet culture has kind of driven that restrictive diet mentality. And a lot of that is changing now.
So is it it seems like anything, if you have a routine that you can actually stick with as part of your life and it's not going to go away in 30 days, 6 months, a year, it's something that you can maintain
Yeah.
and maybe evolve over time, but something you can adhere to is going to work more than kind of these drastic, well, I'm going to do all or nothing, or like all this or that, very, very rigid, specific things that don't seem like, are you really going to do that for the next 20, 30 years?
You just hit the nail on the head. That all or nothing. A lot of the clients that I see are all or nothing eaters. Either I eat the whole box of cookies or I eat no cookies. I teach people how to have a few, right? To eat foods
Hmm.
mindfully, to really enjoy them, to not think of foods as good foods or bad foods, right? Once we label a food bad and then we eat it, it sets up this whole spiral, feeling shameful, feeling upset, feeling guilty.
Oh, I think I
It
lost
doesn't
your
work.
audio. Try, I think you lost your audio for a second. Let me see. That's not good.
I lost.
No, you're back. You dropped out for a second.
Oh,
So maybe repeat what you just said because for some reason
abs-
your mic dropped.
oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. So you hit the nail on the head when you said kind of all or nothing eating, right? When people think of foods as good foods and bad foods, it sets up a dynamic. right? If I either they eat no cookies or they eat the whole box. And I try to teach people how to have
Mhm.
just a little bit and eat it mindfully.
Yeah, I think a lot of times food is, it's like something that replaces, something in your life. Like it's not just, some people use food as a crutch, like alcohol or any other substance, and it's not actually satisfying what they need for their dietary or nutritional reasons. It's satisfying like a hole in their life, right? And then that could be a problem if you're using food like that, right?
Absolutely. So my book, Why Did I Just Eat That, really is about how to manage what I call emotion triggered eating, which is food when foods really get eaten due to emotional reasons. Every time I hang up
Mm,
with my mom, I grab a box of cookies. That's an emotional reaction, right? And so if we're going to take away food as the
yeah.
coping mechanism, we got to put something else in its place. I have to teach people how to have different coping mechanisms that they can go to.
It's like that reward. Like if you always like, well, I'm gonna get myself like a piece of cake as a reward for doing something, right? But you're a diabetic. Well, that's probably not the best thing to be doing, right? Because you like that, diabetics. I'm a type two diabetic, and we tend to
Mhm.
crave the sugar that we shouldn't have. And sometimes we want to
Yeah.
reward ourselves with that sweet thing, but we know we really shouldn't, and you pay for it. And so then, like, how do you start to have to train yourself? I got to find a different reward. I have to find a different way, or I have to like, why do I need the reward? Right? Is that where you have to actually look in the mirror and figure, why am I doing that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the first thing is to figure out, are you really hungry? Right? If you're going to go for food, am I really hungry? So that's number one, the first question. The second question I like to have people ask themselves is, what is it I need right now? Right? If I'm angry or if I'm sad or if I'm lonely, I don't need food. Right? If hunger isn't the problem, food isn't the answer. And the last question that I have people ask themselves is, how will I feel after I eat this? Right? So if somebody is diabetic and their blood sugar goes up, they may not feel so good afterwards, right? So it's about giving some thought to, right? Not just using your emotional side of your brain, but really using the thinking side of your brain as well.
So maybe one of the questions I like to answer is like the baked in roots of emotional triggered eating. Like, what are those baked in roots, or what is the concept of a baked in root?
So people usually there are different reasons why people use food, right? And everybody's a little bit different. And so finding out what works for you and what your individual triggers are is really important, right? So some people eat when they're bored, some people eat when they're feeling lonely, some people eat when they're stressed. Other people can't eat when they're stressed, or when they're bored or lonely, they don't want to eat. And so I help, it's such an individualized thing. I help people figure out exactly what works for them.
It seems I lost your signal again. I don't know what's going on.
I can see you. Do you see me?
Yeah, I see you now.
Okay. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Yeah, for some reason we're getting a bad signal. It keeps on dropping off, so I lost what you just said.
Um, okay.
But I know we were talking about baked in eating patterns, and then it dropped right in the middle of your answer.
Okay. Yes. So different individuals respond differently, right? When some people feel stressed, they use food, they overeat. When other people feel stressed, they can't eat. When some people feel lonely or anxious, they use food. Other people don't use food or can't eat. So helping each person figure out kind of what their individual triggers are, and how they can work around them is really important.
Yeah, I think that's very important to understand that. So, if people are trying to like not seek food out for comfort, what are like non-food methods that they can start to look at from your experience?
Yeah. So part of what I always do at the beginning is have people come up with different coping mechanisms. For example, if they're creative, right? Find projects that they could do so that if they know they're not hungry, but they're looking for food, go do a project. It will distract them, keep them busy, and hopefully bring them some pleasure. But it's really important for people to develop better coping mechanisms, right? If we want to take away food as a
Yeah, I
coping
think that's very,
mechanism,
yeah,
yeah, we need to give other ones in
yeah, I
its
think it's
place.
real important. Yeah, it's super important to have alternatives um, to using food as a kind of happiness replacement.
Right. Yes. And one
Because
other important
like
piece
yeah,
is flexibility, right? People need to learn flexibility with their eating. It's not, some people talk about clean eating where all the time, like they really focus on eating very, very healthy all the time. That usually backfires, right? So being able to have a little bit of what I call fun food every once in a while, learning how to work that in. Anytime we restrict any type of foods, our brain sort of wants it more. Like you were talking about being a diabetic, right? Type 2. And so, too
yeah.
much sugar is probably not good for you, right? But that is sort of a restrictive feeling. And so you have to find some other things to have in its place so that you don't feel restricted.
I think yeah, a lot of times like you might have is it if you look at people's history, is it something from like childhood? Is it really early that people get the habits of like maybe using the like why am I eating this food? Does it go back to their childhood? Or does it happen at different points in life? Is it more common types of experiences in that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I had a client who was trying to figure out why she liked to have milk and cookies at night. And the more we talked about it, the more she realized whenever she got upset, her mom would bring her milk and cookies and sit there with her. And so she developed that as kind of a soothing coping mechanism. And once she realized where it came from, she was able to break that association and realize that she didn't really need those cookies and milk at night after all. So, yes, a lot of it is from our childhood.
Is it a lot of it? You know, I guess a lot of times we people find that they have like imposter syndrome or they had like a traumatic experience as a kid, and is it kind of tied to those kind of concepts?
So, a lot of people, especially youngsters, don't have a lot of options, right? They don't have a lot of coping mechanisms available to them. They can't be rude to an adult. They can't, not go to school if school's hard. Like they're so limited in what they can do. And so one thing that kids can do is they can control what they eat. Um, you can put food in front of a child, but you can't make them eat it. And also,
Hmm.
if kids are using food as a coping mechanism, sometimes they'll sneak food. They'll try to get it in ways because sometimes adults will try to limit them.
So it's important to understand, like, what your food trigger is, I guess, when you start to like identify your emotional well-being, right? So are there different like scenarios or types of like things you could go through, like top five things or common, areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple of things that I do with clients. Sometimes they'll keep a food diary, but it's a food mood diary. So it's not just what they ate, but how are they feeling? And after time, they can start to associate different feelings with perhaps different foods, right? And I had a client who was a college student, and she realized that she was eating too much at night, and she kept a food record, and she realized this one person used to come visit her who annoyed her, and whenever they would leave, she would eat. And so once she made that association, the next time the person came, she's like, nope, not hungry, I'm not going to eat. Writing it down is really helpful.
So keeping a diary is like any kind of self-help. A lot of times it's like that looking glass self-reflection. I always kind of revert to the Victorian poets because I'm a creative person. As a musician, I was always interested in this idea, like, well, if you look in the mirror, like that looking glass self, like why do I have this mindset? Why am I doing this? So that's like a singer songwriter or the writer in me wants to analyze emotions and feelings and try to come up with art or stories out of it, which basically makes you kind of address your life and actually look at it in a way that a diary does for somebody that's not maybe a writer, but they keep a log and they start to realize, oh, if I actually start to document what's going on, then maybe I can assess what is actually happening in my life. Instead of thinking it's like, oh, it says I'm out of control and I don't know how to control it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And people, after they have, like, if they maybe eat too much, like binge eat one night, will often go back and kind of work back during the day or a few hours prior and try to figure out what the trigger was, because there's almost always a trigger there. There's something that happens that creates that need to use food as a coping mechanism.
So I guess part of the whole process is like understanding the trigger, understand why you're using food as like a crutch, but also like the whole kind of treadmill of the diet culture, and to kind of like, okay, well, I don't want to get drawn into that too, because then that's actually probably negative, has a negative result. So how do you get to pull somebody out of the behaviors or the triggered behaviors, and then the response to these fad diets are the solution, and then I guess the analysis of, oh, okay, there's multiple parts to this. So is it a journey? Like you don't try to handle all of it at once.
Right.
You kind of go through this step by step, like how you process it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the first thing that's important to do is to try to figure out if your hunger and fullness cues are working, right? So think of a baby. We're all born with hunger and fullness cues that are intact, right? You feed a baby, you put a bottle in. When they're done, they spit it out, right? Maybe you give it to them again, see if they take a little more. They're done, they spit it out. They're done. Their fullness cues are telling you that they're done. And so somewhere along the way, those internal hunger and fullness cues kind of get overridden for some people. They can't trust their hunger cues. They can't trust their fullness cues. And so I try to help people reconnect with their hunger and fullness cues. For some people, that takes a while. It depends how kind of broken they are, if you will. So I'll do more mechanical eating, eat something every 3 hours to start, kind of set up a rhythm with your body so that your body gets fed and it knows it's going to get fed.
Do you find with people who are, doing like eating more than they need to because of the emotional eating, that they're not on a schedule, that they're kind of all over the map, and getting them on to breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe a snack at certain times, but having a more regular schedule, is that kind of maybe that's what's broken initially, but I don't know, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, that can be really helpful. A lot of overeating actually starts with restriction, right? So perfect example is Thanksgiving. People will say to me, oh, I'm not going to have any breakfast. I'm not going to have any lunch. I'm going to save my appetite. So they walk in there starving. They're over hungry, right? It's a really hard job to stop eating when you're just comfortably full, when your body is so over hungry. It's like a survival mechanism left over from the caveman days, right? It was feast, famine, feast, famine.
Mm.
And so it's really important to not restrict prior, right? Eat. And then when you get there, eat until you're full, comfortably full, as opposed to restricting and then overeating.
Yeah, and then some people might be eating like really late at night because they have insomnia. So are
Mhm.
they watching like late TV or they're watching movies like 2 a.m. and they order a pizza because they're up, or
Yeah.
they order Mexican because they're up, and because they get the DoorDash and the Uber that they can get it. So it's like because it's so convenient, it's like, well, I can actually get it, but is
Yeah.
that actually like just because I can get it isn't actually a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I try to encourage people to not eat and watch television, right? Because it's mindless. Like it doesn't even register. Think about going to the movie theater with a big container of popcorn and we're doing this.
Hmm,
And then suddenly it's like, wait, where'd it go? It's gone,
it's
right?
all
There's
gone.
like
Yeah.
this, yeah, there's no connection between the brain and the stomach. But the opposite is what we call mindful eating, like really paying attention on purpose, using all of our senses. And I do this activity with a lot of my clients. I'll take a piece of food and have them like smell it, have them look at it, have them, if it makes noise, take it to their ear, use all their senses. Very slowly put it in their mouth, very slowly taste it's exaggerated, but it helps teach about mindful eating, connecting the brain and the stomach. And so I say to people, if you want to have a snack, turn the TV, pause the TV, go sit down, have your snack, go back in front of the TV after. The connection between the two is not very effective. It's not very useful.
Also, I've noticed, like, if you think about the portion size, like in American cuisine, if you go, like even a movie theater, like the size of the drink
Yeah.
is like enormous. The size of the popcorn, even the small one, is like more than what you need.
Yeah.
And so even if you go like to a restaurant, like as a diabetic, I run into this all the time. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can eat with my friends, but I have to control the portion that I get because the portion that they give me is more than what I can actually have. So I have to know that I can't eat everything on the plate. But sometimes
Yes.
it being on the plate is a cue that why I got to finish it. Do you run into people that
Yes.
they think they have to finish everything that's in front of them?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I call that a seafood eater, SEE, seafood eater, right? If it's in front of them and they see it, it makes them think they're hungry when there may not actually be. Also, many people are taught to finish everything on their plate, which with it totally makes sense in terms of food is expensive, right? Um, but I encourage people to eat until they're full, and then if there's still food there, put it in the fridge. They don't have to throw it out, but they also don't have to eat it right then.
You could take it home in the doggy bag. You don't have to have everything there. You
Yeah,
could give it and say, hey, give it to your partner and say, I don't need it.
yeah, yeah,
If they're yeah, you don't have to eat everything there. And I think that's a
that's
lot
right.
of times is like, the portion size is way beyond what you can actually have, what you should have. And just because
Yeah,
they give it to you doesn't mean you should eat it.
yeah.
And
Actually, some of
diabetics, we
my
know that
clients,
right away.
yeah, yeah, that's so true. Some of my clients actually take half the meal if it's big, put it in a doggy bag, ask them to put it away at the beginning of the meal so that they have a smaller portion in front of them. Sometimes it's hard when it's there to not eat it. So if you know it's too much for you, and you can even put it aside beforehand.
Well, you ask for more salad or more veggies than carbs. Like being a diabetic, we have to cut the carbs.
Yep.
Protein and veggies are always good, but just learning, you know, like as a diabetic, now I have like a sensor I'm wearing. I have a watch, and it's telling me what my numbers are. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I know what my numbers are like all the time, and it's kind of
Yeah,
like I have to know that because it's kind of important. It can be dangerous if I don't know. But an average person may not have that kind of glucose meter, continuous glucose meter that's telling them, oh, I actually took too much in. A
sure.
diabetic, we know we might not feel good. We can see the number on our meter, but like teaching a person that doesn't have that tool to know that, oh, how do you like recognize that you've actually gone overboard?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. It's also important the combining a protein. Like if we have carbohydrate, it's really important to have protein in there, right? Protein keeps the blood sugar more stable. And so, it's not only how much you're eating, it's also what you're eating, right? So making sure
Mhm.
that you're balancing things, right? So, sitting down to a big bowl of pasta, right, with without any protein in it is probably going to raise your blood sugar more than if you have a piece of chicken and a little side dish of a carbohydrate.
Yeah, and I know a lot of what we do is like, those of us who have like glucose problems, like we know we have to like maybe add like 30 minutes of walking or stair stepping if I'm going to eat pasta. And I really probably shouldn't have the pasta. I should probably have like
Yeah,
the mushroom pasta instead. But if I
yeah,
happen to go out and I'm with people that actually have pasta, then I might have to go for a walk, or I might not have dessert. I'm
yeah,
not going to have a drink. It's like you're going
yeah.
to make decisions to kind of try to not, have a bad effect. But I think you have to think maybe holistically, where maybe some people don't think about food that way. They don't think about what they're eating and what impact it has.
That's true. That's true. And a lot of it comes down to choices, right? So if you're choosing to have, again, I call them nourishing foods and fun foods. If you're choosing to have a fun food, maybe later in the day, choose something else, right? So balancing, right, and flexibility is really important.
So it's having a strategy for how you're going to handle food in your life. If you've been in this kind of situation where like, why am I eating this?
Yeah,
You've got to be able to kind of. It's not going to be a fad thing. It's like it's not something you're just going to do for 30 days and then you're done. So
right.
how do you get those healthy habits to be part of your remapping your brain to realize like this is something I need to continue?
Yeah. So we get better at whatever we practice, right? If you think about it, right? Did you just get into a car and it's like jump on the highway? Probably not,
Oh,
right? You practiced and you used the
yeah.
brakes and the gas and the steering. It's the same thing with the more we practice that balance. And I usually say like 80 80% nourishing foods, 20% fun foods. The more we practice that balance, the better at it that we get, right? And if we ask ourselves, all right, am I hungry? Do I need this? Right? What is it I need right now? How will I feel after I eat this? That helps the thinking part of our brain get in there so that we can make better decisions. We're not reacting.
But also it's probably kind of like I remember like, Schoolhouse Rock and the old cartoons. They used to have the food pyramid. And they used to have this cartoon that would show you then Saturday morning, like this is the food pyramid. This is what you should be. This is how you stay healthy.
Yeah.
These are the foods that kind of add it in a song and you could remember it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if everybody's learning like the food pyramid or they understand, what foods have the best nutritional value because sometimes we're so into consumerism and the ads we see. Everybody's like, oh, I
Right.
got to get that cheesy, buttery bacon thing because it keeps on getting pushed into my head, through
Yeah.
the advertising. I'm getting stuff that's not really healthy for me, but that's what I'm being told. It's like, well, that's your reward is that bacon cheeseburger. It's
Mm-hmm.
that bacon everything, you know.
Yes, yes. So they've shifted their view on fat. So, they used to, talk about fats being, way back when I kind of was learning to be a dietitian, it was fats are bad, right? And what they now know is that that's not true, right? Some types of fats are less helpful than others, right? So saturated fats are probably less healthy for your body than, avocado and nuts and seeds. But still, we need to
Hmm.
eat those in moderation as well, right? We can't, it's not a free for all.
Yeah, it's important. Like you realize, that you can satisfy your hunger with like, a good, like an apple, some cheese, some nuts, some, seeds, like, different types of seeds you could have. And you can realize like you got to understand like your nervousness might be that you feel like you got to have something in your hand, something in your mouth. So if you've got some kind of thing where you're just doing it to kind of calm yourself,
Yeah.
or you need to be, eating that popcorn or eating that bag of chips because it's like a habit. You don't
Yeah.
even want it, right? You just kind of like muscle memory. It's kind of like I'm a musician. I train myself on my instrument like 10,000 hours. But if you've been doing that since you were 10 years old, you always ate the whole bag of chips. Anything time you got triggered, it's probably hard to unlearn that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So there are different kind of squeezy balls. There's different things people can do with their hands, right? Like they have like putties and things like that. And sometimes I suggest to people they get some beads, put them in the putty, and kind of like try to dig in there for the beads and use your hands. And again, if hunger isn't the problem, food isn't the answer. So trying to figure out, what they could do to manage whatever emotion it is that they're having right then.
You can get into a hobby. I'm a creative, so I like to either create videos or create music or do podcasting. Or so instead of sitting and eating like a whole thing of Oreo cookies because I got a sugar fit, I'll go onto my piano and write a song. Because I'll take that energy, like I'll take that drive. It's like, well, you know what? I'm actually going to sit down and actually write a song, or I'm going to practice this chord arrangement until I get it the
Mhm,
way I want. So
mhm.
people find other things other than food to have their attention or
Yeah.
be in activity because I guess it becomes like an activity if you just eat something like the whole thing of Ben and Jerry's or the whole bag of chips or the whole thing of popcorn when you really didn't mean to do it and you're like, oh, so how could you like take that into writing the journal or doing something that's different?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, the solution you gave is actually a really good one. So, if you think of the brain as having kind of an emotional response and or a thinking response, right? Um, Most of the food cravings come out of more of the emotional part of the brain. And so, if we get the thinking part in there, right, get our brain to say, well, what else could I do? I often have people make a list, like you were saying, your music, right? If somebody likes music or they're a songwriter, I say, write that down on your list, right? Or someone who's creative, let's say needlepoint or embroidery. So, right, something, a project that they can do. If we write it down, then in the moment, we can go to our list. Sometimes it's hard to think of things to do, but if you have it written down already, it makes it so much easier. And once we kind of distract ourselves and start doing something, very often we forget that we were going to go get food because we're not really hungry.
You forget, like if you get preoccupied writing a song, I can get lost in my piano. I get lost in my all my synthesizers and all my recording equipment. And then I got to be mindful because then I was like, I don't want my sugar to go too low because I got another problem.
Right, right, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
you get so drawn into it, you forget to eat.
Yeah.
So, on the opposite side, do you have people who undereat or don't eat enough, or is it you primarily look at people who overeat?
I work with all different types of eating issues. So some people don't eat enough, right? They restrict, right, on purpose, right? So that for some people it's a sense of control, right? For some people it's their way of kind of communicating to people in their family. Like if the communication, if they don't have great communication skills, eating or not eating becomes a way of communicating.
Mhm.
And once people start losing weight and it goes into a spiral, right? Their brain gets underfed. It's hard for them to think clearly. So we have to, make sure that we give them enough nutrients to get them to the place where their brain can think clearly again.
That's interesting because I read about, tragedy of Karen Carpenter, and it seemed like there was a lot of, if you read about her documentary, there was a lot of issues with her family, like her relationship with her mother. Like it's
Yeah.
been documented that there was like a problem there that kind of cascaded into her anorexia. So it seems like sometimes, those issues, emotional issues, or the relationship issues, can trigger the eating issues, which we've been kind of
Yeah.
implying through the whole podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely can. That's one scenario. Also, eating disorders, if we're talking about true eating disorders, there's often a genetic link to it. So sometimes you'll look back and you'll see it in other family members. There's a saying that's used, which is that the genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. In other words,
Mm.
you can have several siblings in a family and only one of them develops an eating disorder. And that has to do with some type of a social or environmental trigger that happens, but they all have the genetic underpinnings.
Yeah, different things could apply in a family, like different people's their the diseases or the issues that happen could present themselves in different ways. Somebody could get into an eating disorder, and then the brother could be a gambling addict,
Yeah.
or go into alcoholism or some other addiction. Might not be the same thing, but it seems like it's in the same space because they have the same tendency to maybe fall into that trap.
So usually these things are kind of what's underneath them is anxiety, right? And so, we don't choose, and we don't choose how our brain is wired. We don't get to choose that any more than we get to choose our hair color, our eye color, whether we're left-handed or right-handed. Like these things are chosen for us. We also don't get to choose how our brain is wired. And so if there's alcoholism in the family, right, there's a better chance that somebody who's dealing with anxiety may use alcohol as a way to self-soothe, right? If there's eating disorders in the family, that may be the way, and it's not their choice. Like people don't choose to have
Hmm.
an eating disorder. People don't choose to typically be, deal with whatever they deal with. It's sort of chosen for them. There's a biological piece to it, but that doesn't mean you can't work with it. That doesn't mean a lot of people recover from eating disorders. Many, right? Many people through programs and abstinence are able to manage alcoholism. So just because somebody has the kind of the genetics doesn't mean that they're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's like anything. I mean, like my diabetes runs in my family, going back to my great grandparents, and
Mhm.
everybody's had to kind of deal with it. And I'm on a path to try to do as much as I can to minimize it.
Yeah.
But there are people in my family that maybe didn't understand it, and then compounded it with like alcoholism and
Yeah.
other bad traits. And then my grandpa isn't here, my pop's not here.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of that kind of genetic history and say, well, if I'm predisposed, then I probably need to kind of get out in front of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, just because we're predisposed doesn't mean we'll get it, right? But it's smart to think about it, right? How can I set myself up for the best chance of, success here? Like, what can I do to help myself, um, try to avoid something?
Now, part of anything conversation I've had with a lot of therapists is that concept of like guilt and shame having an
Hmm.
impact on what's going on in their lives, and how much is does guilt and shame have to do with being able to make like positive changes in this without having to deal with those two concepts?
Yeah.
Right? You
So,
have to kind of get over those things, right, in order to make progress.
yeah, yeah. So it's interesting that you bring that up because a lot of people think guilt and shame are similar and they're actually different, right? So guilt is more about, I let's say I step on your toe, right? And I feel so guilty. I'm sorry I hurt you, right? Because my value is to not hurt anybody. So if I hurt you, then I'm going to feel guilty, right? But shame goes to the core of who we are as a person, right? I'm a bad person because
Hmm.
and there's a lot of shame with eating disorders because a lot of people feel like it's their fault, and it's really not their fault. And so, but a lot of people do feel shame. They feel like they should be able to overcome it, or their struggles are something that they've done wrong. It's not accurate. And many people, in our first meeting, I might say to you, you know what, this isn't your fault. And very often that's met with kind of a stream of tears. They feel relieved.
It's important to give people that kind of permission to have that moment, because I think a lot of times people have been put into a place where the world's very judgmental of like things that aren't well, you should be beyond this, or like expectations could be that there's a lot of pressure on people to be in the box normal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And nobody is actually in that box, and most people are outside the box. Most people aren't really. They might be think they are, but everybody's an individual, and they're always like fit in the mold. And sometimes there's a
Hmm.
lot of guilt for like, oh, like I didn't fit the mold, or I want to be like the Joneses. I want to the comparison trap, where you're not
Ah,
willing to be your like your vulnerable self.
yeah.
Like artists, we live in vulnerability. Vulnerability is our secret sauce. That's kind of
Mm,
what we have as our edge. That our individual, audacity to have authenticity, and then deal with the consequences. Like, oh, like, what
yeah.
is that? Why did you do that? It's like, well, because that's me.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a good point though. A lot of people, there's a lot of self-judgment as well, right? And people, it's a choice how we look at ourselves, right? If we do something, let's say, I don't know, let's say we say something and afterwards we think, oh, why did I say that, right? Everybody does that. Everybody makes mistakes. That's why there's erasers on pencils, right? And so I encourage people to be kind to themselves and say, okay, I made a mistake. It seemed like a good idea at the time, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. And move on. Don't beat yourself up. A lot of people beat themselves up and they compare themselves to other people, right? And
Well,
comparison is the thief of joy. Yeah.
mistakes are like the core of creativity, right? What we call like the happy accident is another way for saying a mistake without actually giving it a negative connotation. In music, like the unplanned like concept, like there's no bad note, there's only an opportunity, right? So if you're
Right.
in a band and you hit the wrong note for the composition, and the rest of the band actually takes that note and evolves the song based on that note that was not expected, but they don't stop, right? They don't stop the song. They actually go with it and take the song in that key, which had not
Mm-hmm.
been expected, but you go with it, like a jazz fusion band or an experimental band. They're more willing to say, "Oh, that's fine. Let's go that way." Where somebody was more traditional, like, "Well, if that's not on the bar, that's not on the page, then we got to stop the whole thing and start it again." And
Right.
I'm kind of in the mindset that if there's no bad note, there's an opportunity. I don't have to stop it. I can
Yeah.
actually continue the song, and you wouldn't even know we made a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that goes along with flexibility. a lot of people who struggle with eating disorders and, are more perfectionistic, right? Which is the opposite. It's very rigid. And, they
Yeah,
set unrealistic expectations for themselves.
well, perfection is really a trap, because you're never going to hit it. And so you're
That's
always
right.
going to get disappointed. Where if you just say,
Exactly.
well, I'm going to give it my try, the best try, and it's deal with the results, you'll find that, like, and I find like in all art, the imperfections are like
Yeah.
what makes a painting beautiful. Because like that point in time, painting brush, the brush stroke, that's a point in time you might not be able to recapture that. And that's what it is at that moment. And that in
That's right.
itself can be beautiful, but a lot of people want to be able to replicate that moment exactly all the time in that same sequence. And then they get caught in that they'll probably never hit it again. And then they'll be very depressed because they can't
That's
hit
right.
it again.
That's right. That's right. It's so unrealistic, right? Perfectionism is unrealistic. So I encourage people to have good enough thinking, right? Can you do it good enough? That's
But a
I
lot
think
of
that
times,
builds
you know,
self-kindness.
yeah, if you can, like, it's like the self love is where you start. If you have a lot of self loathing, you're probably not going to be a happy camper. You're not going to be somebody like the law of attraction if you're always in that kind of space.
Yeah,
Well, then it's going to be like storm clouds around again. Most people probably don't want to be around that stormy situation. And then you're
right.
like, well, you're kind of creating the environment that's setting it up. So if you can start to realize the win you can have, like, oh, I got up today and it could be a good day instead of saying, I got it's going to be a terrible day.
Yes.
Thinking about what the little wins that you can make instead of the
Mm-hmm.
things that you didn't hit. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yep.
so much emphasis on what you didn't hit or what goal you missed, and then you get depressed because you're focusing just on those negative things rather than any of the
Yeah.
positive things that you could have actually accomplished get thrown away. Is not
That's
mattering.
so spot on. That's so true. I'll often have people say, well, I managed this and this and this, but then I failed. I did whatever, and I said, but look what you did do. Focus on what you did do, what you can do. Um, Not where everyone struggles sometimes, right? So a lot of it is a choice. How we look at things is a choice.
It's kind of like if you're on the diet kind of scenario we were talking about. The problem with like a diet is like it's so rigid, and then you get off the wagon like, oh, you missed it because you didn't only eat group X. You went and ate something from group A,
Right.
and now like you failed it. So then now like you're kind of back to square one. Where if you're more okay, here's a goal that I shouldn't eat the whole box of cookies.
Right.
And 99% of the time, I'm not eating a box of cookies. But one day I fell off the wagon, and like you feel bad, but like now you don't go and eat the whole box every day just
That's
because you
right.
went off one time.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And kind of taking a step back and looking at it, right? Well, this is what I did do, and this is what I can do, right? We build on our successes. And so the more successes we have, the more we can build upon them. I also think the root of so many eating issues, and I said this a little bit before, is about when people think of food as good or bad, right? When they label it good or bad. So one of my favorite tricks that I do with people, and usually in my first meeting, is I'll say, "What's your definition of a good food?" Right? And they'll say, carrots or oranges or apples. I'm like, okay. And what's your definition of a bad food? And they'll say, oh, cookies or ice cream or cake. And with that, I pull up some photos, right? And one photo is a rotten lime. One photo is a moldy piece of bread, right? And so I say to them, this is my definition of a bad food, right? It's something moldy, something rotten, something sour, something stale. Those are bad foods. The other stuff is just foods, and learning how to be okay, and have a little bit of it here and there is really, in my opinion, the secret to long-term, well-balanced eating.
It's like that balance. It's like, and I'm a Buddhist, but there's like idea in Buddhism is like there's a balance in life. And like a lot of times, if you go to any extreme on the polar sides of things, then you're gonna be like out of balance. So if you can have something and you look at it, it's like, yeah, there's no real good or bad food other than like this rotten food as you described, something that went bad or some, then he's like, well, yeah, moderation is like the key. The balance
Yeah.
is like the source of like trying to be in alignment with like the universe. It's like
Yeah.
in music we have like dissonance, we have noise, and we have harmony, right? So in a song, I could have a dissonant part, I could have a noisy part, and then I have a harmonious part. If it's all harmony, it's boring. Like if there's no build up, if there's no other aspect, it can be boring. So like just having harmony all the time isn't necessarily the right balance. Sometimes you
Yep.
might want something to be a little noisy or distorted or discordant or jarring because it's actually part of the experience. And so balance is like understanding that all those things in the on the scale, and it's just not going to one or the other too much.
Yeah. I never realized how much music and food could have in common, right? Because what you're saying, it really does mirror what I'm saying. So, yeah.
Yeah, I try to find the parallels. That's my thing
Yeah.
as a creator is like, how can I find musical parallels to other like concepts? And
Yeah.
I find that a lot of things in music are, it's mathematical in its sense, and it's about balance, and people can understand like harmony. They can understand like being in tune like with other people. Like sometimes you can feel like I'm out of tune with this group of people. I'm out of sync. I feel like an outsider. Right.
Hmm.
So why does that happen? And so once you start to recognize like you can have a vibe, you go into a room, you feel like why is there a bad vibe? Because like you're kind of out of tune, you're not in sync with what's going on. You're kind of not, you don't have like that basically an understanding, situational awareness.
Hmm.
And you can
Hmm.
have that like at a microcosm and a macrocosm. Like you have situational awareness within your own self and body. And maybe what we're talking about, like while you're eating too much, is because you don't have a good situational awareness for your own inner self, for your own body. You're not aware. And then you might also have you might be out of sync with the greater society too. And so once you get yourself more in sync, you might find yourself more in sync with the outer world too.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I think that diet culture has made it so hard for people, right? People think that if they just diet enough, they could be in a tiny body, right? They can be in this ideal size body. And the truth is that bodies are genetically kind of predetermined, right? Some people are, have a smaller stature. Some people have a taller stature, right? Some people belong in an extremely tiny body. Some people belong in a larger body because genetics, and there's just so many factors, right? We're not all coming from the same
Yeah.
mold.
Yeah. The problem with like the influencer culture, like it really does affect a lot of young people. Is you get these people and you don't even know. It's like, is that Photoshop? Is that influencer on like social media? Is that a real person or is that AI enhanced? Is that
Yeah.
photoshopped? And so, and even if they like this person is kind of extreme, you know, they're being put up as the example for all the
Yeah.
young people, and I'm like, they might not be the right example. It could be like somebody, like a guy that's got six pack abs, and he's kind of real built up, but it's not really built for his frame, and he might be using steroids or something. It's not really doable for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But that is put up as the paradigm, and so then people might go and do things that are not really healthy to appear healthy.
Yes, that is so true. And I think social media, especially for kids and adolescents, people, compare themselves. They compare how they feel on the inside with how someone looks on the outside, right? That's a lose-lose proposition, right? You're never going to feel good about yourself because you know how you feel inside, right? And you're looking at someone's exterior. You don't know what's going on inside of their brain, right? You don't know how they feel inside. So, helping, youngsters kind of understand that, it's tricky.
Yeah, because like I did talk to a person that was like a trainer, and they had the perfect body. This guy, he was six pack ass, but he was super depressed, even when he was in this great physical
There you go.
state.
Right.
So the idea that being in that kind of bodybuilder form, he still wasn't happy internally. So
Yeah,
somebody who saw him on a Facebook might say, "Well, he's God made, he's happy." He wasn't happy. So
that's right.
that tells you like that's not the key to your happiness necessarily. It's a really kind of case by case situation.
Yeah, yeah. And also learning, look, most people, the majority of people don't have the perfect body, right? We all have a part of our body. Oh, I wish this were different. I wish that were different. So, but can you develop some kindness towards it, right? So your legs may not be the shape that you're hoping they would be, but they show up for you. They take you from place to place. Like, can you accept them as they are? And self-kindness, it's so crucial.
Well, I find like once you accept yourself, then the world starts to accept you. Like once you're willing to be your true like individual, like vulnerable, authentic self, that you find your crowd, your tribe. Like I've found that like if you're willing to be authentic, then other people will be kind of influenced by that, and then they'll show
Hmm.
you themselves too, and then you'll
Yeah.
find that you actually aren't the only one that feels that
Hmm.
way or acts that way. That
Hmm.
because you're willing to be real or be you, that other people will feel like, well, they have permission to do that too, and then it just feels more comfortable when you're around people who aren't put on airs or have a mask. Not everybody wears a mask at some level, but the minimize it as much as possible.
Sure, absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
But if I wanted to mention your URL because we're getting near the end of the show. But why did I just eat that.com? If people click on that, what happens? How do they get introduced to everything that you're about there?
Yeah. So that's the name of my book. Why did I just eat that? So it takes them to my book website, which explains a little bit about my book, where it's available, and different resources. It also links to my business account, which is Integrating Nutrition. So they're able to find me either way.
Okay, so that's your book, and so that's out everywhere, like Amazon, bookstores everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We
And
do
that was a
encourage
labor of love.
everybody. We do encourage everyone who listens or watches the podcast to actually click through on the URL, which will be clickable, so that you can check out your book. And like, why did I just eat that.com? That's fully clickable. Not right now, but anywhere the podcast is actually published. And I
Mhm.
want to thank you again for being a guest on the Family Like the Ghost podcast. We are live right now on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. We will be on all the major podcast platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast by tomorrow. But I do appreciate that you were a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great night.
You too.